All right, I guess we can go ahead and get started. I appreciate y'all coming today. My name is Todd Stabley. I'm with Duke University's Office of Information Technology. And I'm excited to share a little bit with y'all about what we're doing with asset management these days and centralizing that service. I'm gonna have to park myself behind the podium a little bit just because the clicker doesn't work with Keynote, so apologize for that. But just a little bit about the group that I work in. It's always nice to come to a conference like this and be with other professionals who have similar groups, you know, because there's always some overlap and some things that you all do differently, and it's nice to kind of compare notes, and we're all trying to solve the same problems, you know, in the end, so it's nice to hear how other people are doing it. So just a little bit of background about how we've done it at Duke. We've had a core engineering team in place since about 2005, and the goal of that group has always been to design and deploy enterprise media services for Duke. And I was just really excited to come to Duke. I came in 2006. And when I heard that they were doing something like that, it was just really unique. I had been actually at UNC Chapel Hill before, and the idea of doing a central group that's focused just on enterprise media was new at the time. And in particular, the first thing we did was to spin up an enterprise lecture capture system. And that was my big project when I came to Duke. And it was super exciting. We had a tool called Lectopia. I don't know if you've heard of it, developed at the University of Western Australia. And it was a really cool kind of homegrown product that worked really well for a few years. And they got bought by a company that I guess at the time was called AnyStream, and now they're Echo 360, and the product got channeled into that product. And so in 2010, we kind of had a big decision to make whether we were going to stick with Echo 360 because they were kind of phasing out the Lectopia platform. So we spun up a big evaluation of all the different products, and we chose Panopto and rolled that out in 2010. So I've been working pretty heavily with Panopto. Along with basically, though, the idea of our group is that we're not just bringing these services up and supporting them indefinitely, but we're actually kind of keeping our, you know, eyes to the horizon and trying to figure out what's next and what's new. So I love that about our group with that focus on innovation. So lecture capture, streaming, and video conferencing were the big three initially. And in 2015, the group actually had a pretty significant expansion to kind of deal with the whole online courses phenomenon. Duke has a heavy presence on Coursera, and we also have our own platforms that we deliver online instruction through, both centrally and through the professional schools. So we hired a team of 4 professional video editors to create content for faculty that are doing these online courses so that they have, you know, much more polished content than having to do it on their own. So that's been kind of a nice growth of the group. But one interesting thing about our group that I think allows us to keep that focus on innovation has been that we rely really heavily on what we call site administrators. So I'm in central IT, and my colleagues, you know, are there. But we partner really closely with the IT professionals in the different schools and departments, and they're the ones that are actually interfacing directly with the faculty and with the students. So they're doing that kind of first level support, and then our group exists in support of them. And then, you know, we also have our vendors that we can go to support where we need it. So we really try to leverage those relationships, and allows us to really kind of, you know, not have to spend all our time supporting, like a tool like Panopto. I know that a lot of schools run all the scheduling and everything, manage it completely centrally. You know, but at this point, I wouldn't say it runs itself completely, but I can focus on things with Panopto that are more innovative. Like we just actually we moved to Sakai, from Sakai to Canvas last year. And my big project was getting the integration working with Canvas and Panopto. And that was actually a huge challenge for a lot of reasons. Well, I could tell you all would understand this, but basically the whole idea of the identity that each of those understands a person as, getting Zoom, we had an integration with Zoom, Panopto, Sakai, and Canvas all had to understand an identity the same way. And so we had to do some real gymnastics with Panopto to make that work, but it finally did. So can focus on things like that with that service. And so we get to kind of think about what's new and kind of spinning up new projects. And one thing that I love about working at Duke is that they've got the ability to kind of spin these teams up dynamically and really connect into central IT. Central IT has about 500 people, and they all have their different areas of expertise. We've got really great enterprise Windows and Linux teams, a great storage and VMs team, which I'll talk about within the context of this project, our database team, device management. That's key for Panopto because we actually use a kind of a standardized Dell PC as our main, you know, capture unit in the classrooms. And we've got a group that can handle all the automation of the updates and security updates and Panopto updates and just kind of keeping those things working. I was actually just eyeing this Epiphan Perl here. I think, we do have some groups that kind of want to do different things occasionally. Our Divinity School, I think, is looking at these, but I think that's probably a specialized use case where they probably want to send it to Panopto, but also maybe YouTube and other things simultaneously. But so our commodity thing is those Dell PCs, and our device management team supports those, which frees up a lot of time for me to not have to do that. Web development, identity management. Our learning innovation team is actually a separate kind of a sister group. They're the ones that manage our learning management system, so which used to be Sakai and is now Canvas. We've got a really great web accessibility team. And then key in spinning up any new service is really just kind of identifying some core stakeholders. And we've definitely got a great one for this project I'll tell you about. And kind of getting them on board early, figuring out what their need is. And that kind of really drives the project, because you know that it'll have value if you can kind of meet that core stakeholders or group of stakeholders' needs and really work closely with them and invest them in the project. So here's the services that we support currently in the engineering wing of the group. Lecture capture I mentioned, secure streaming. We use something similar to Kaltura called WarpWire, which actually was developed in Durham, where Duke is. And we had the privilege of working with those developers to really kind of build that product. They listened to us in terms of what we thought we needed from a secure streaming solution. Basically, we describe it as a YouTube with the ability to interface with Duke's identity management framework, all of our groups, course groups, and individual users, and sharing it, locking it down with them. We love WarpWire. It's been working great. Digital signage is a big project within my group. We've got a cool project for interactive walking tours called Story, and this is kind of cropping up this year at Duke because this is a centennial for Duke. And they're doing a lot of tours, for the campus just in honor of that. So we have some content that was developed over the years already that'll get some freshening up, and then some brand new content that'll go on that platform. It's just a really inexpensive tool, but does a great job in kind of just geolocating, stops along a map and letting people kind of put information, images and videos to kind of describe those and give people the walking tour experience. We worked a lot with captioning at Duke. I've done a lot with kind of just keeping myself aware of what's happening in that space. We've never had the initiative centrally to make that a central service. I think there are some issues with kind of how to manage that in terms of the administrative piece of billing and things like that. So for now, we just kind of issue recommendations. I've got a document that I keep up. I think most people at Duke are using Rev, and also a new one kind of cropped up called Transcription Puppy, which is actually pretty good. So those are the ones that we're kind of recommending. Enterprise YouTube, that has kind of, I'd say, scaled back over the years just because, it's pretty much self-managed at this point. But I got to go to YouTube's headquarters back in 2006 when that was a new idea to have, a YouTube channel for a university, and that was pretty cool. And that was a big part of my work for a while. We still work quite a bit with, but not nearly as much. Apple Podcasts, that's another example of one. I got to go to Apple headquarters, and now that whole framework has just become very much self-managed with Podcast Manager. So not doing quite as much with that. Live streaming, that also is kind of integrated now. We've got the ability to do that within Panopto, which I think satisfies most people's needs, but we've just took down our last of the kind of streaming servers, that were the staple of this kind of thing early on, which was our Wowza server. We had all the classic ones that people had: Real Media, QuickTime, and Windows Media, and then Flash, which became Wowza. And finally, those are kind of going by the wayside as the stuff gets integrated into larger frameworks. And my team also does a lot with building community at Duke around digital media technologies, and I really do love that part of the job because it's great to kind of, it goes both ways. We learn a lot from the people, and I mentioned those professionals, a lot of AV professionals and IT, definitely a lot of the crossover there. But we learn from each other as we all kind of try out new equipment and just kind of share the results of that. And then the newest service that we have is called MediaBeacon. And this is the particular product. It's called MediaBeacon. We did have a name for it that's kind of more of a generic name. The idea is that it may not always be MediaBeacon. I'll talk a little bit about that as we architected it in such a way that we could slot in a different vendor if we need to, if there are problems with this. We're not wedded to MediaBeacon, but we found that there can be challenges with branding a service like that way. We used to call our capture service Duke Capture. And, that stuck for quite a while, but, everybody's like, oh, you mean Panopto? And yeah, it's Panopto. So we finally just stopped fighting that. And, we just call it Panopto now. So we've kind of learned that lesson. So this is going to be called MediaBeacon. So the idea of MediaBeacon is we're trying to solve the problem of We've got a lot of people, professional, this is tailored in a lot of ways to like what we call our communicators, people that are in the different schools and departments with the role of kind of promoting that and all the different work that happens at Duke. And in the past, those people have been working kind of in isolation, taking their own photographs and videos and accumulating these collections. And those, or maybe they're hiring professional, photographers and videographers. And where does that stuff live? It lives on hard drives that end up, under their desk. And I don't know about you, but I've got my own, basically a drawer at my house full of hard drives. I have some that have like eSATA connections, some with FireWire connections. I've got like a couple of hard drives that I took out of like my old work computers when I was still using like a tower. And, so they have no, housing or anything. So it's like, what happens to all the media that's on there? And let's say that this person leaves Duke, that person, may or may not pass those on to their successor. Maybe there's an office move and, stuff gets in a different place and nobody can find this when it's needed. So that's one aspect of the problem. The other is, how do we share it, with teams of people that are also doing this type of work? I think we've got some systems, like we use Box at Duke quite a bit. And I'll mention that in the context of this presentation a little bit, but there's some challenges with that. I mean, it does a good job of sharing in some ways, but it's not really media specific. It doesn't do a good job of showing you what you're looking at. So really what we're trying to do is kind of acknowledging that Duke, as I'm sure a lot of you have, like really great enterprise storage. We've got it's a research university, and we've got, a huge amount of effort and time and money and staff goes into maintaining Duke's network attached storage infrastructure. And so the thought is, if people will put that, up on there, then we solve all of those problems. And the investment that Duke has made in these assets over all those years gets protected. So the challenge is then, how do we incentivize people to do that? There is a cost. There's kind of like an internal cost that people have to pay to use that storage. It's backed up, it's fast, it's got it's easily expandable, so there are a lot of reasons why it's helpful, but ultimately if people have to pay for it, you kind of have to help incentivize that. I think it's like 17 cents per gigabyte per year to use it. But our thought is, if we can put an enterprise asset management tool on top of that storage, then we can, give people a good reason to start putting it there as opposed to those hard drives. So this is a shot that shows the main interface of MediaBeacon. And, there are a few different things that make this, I think, valuable to those creators. One is just the visual index that you have of your files. MediaBeacon has, and this is actually a criteria we use to compare different products, but something called infinite scroll, where like all the content that you have access to, you could just keep scrolling and it'll just keep populating, this interface. And I think, talking to some of the media producers on campus, you could, even 1,000 or 2,000 images, you could scroll through those probably and find what you're looking for pretty easily if you know what you're looking for. So just that alone has a huge amount of value. This has a list view. I could make the thumbnails a little bit smaller and have like the folder path, file names, and a little bit of date information, maybe file size, things like that displayed here if I wanted to. But we found that this thumbnail view is the most popular one. So yeah, the easily browsable thumbnails. And then with MediaBeacon, definitely the ability to search and retrieve these assets in other ways too is huge. So any sort of metadata that's added to the file can be searchable. MediaBeacon will do some basic color. I'll show you the color sampling that it does automatically when it encodes a file and makes a preview. And then those colors can be selected. You've got the directory search, where you could click on a top-level directory, and it's going to actually show you in that infinite scroll view all of the content that's not only in that top directory, but also the subdirectories too. So it's kind of like, and I'll show you as compared to Box. I've got a screenshot in here later. It's just a lot easier to find things that way. The filter search, you can search for things like creation date. You can search for format, and if I click on format, it'll show like TIFF, JPEG, PDF, and all those things. And kind of, again, when you click on any of those subsets, you're kind of like limiting the number of assets that would show up in that infinite scroll view then for you to kind of search and browse. and subject. So here's where we're getting into the metadata that would be added to the content by creators. And so with MediaBeacon, our core stakeholder was the Duke Photography Archive. And this is a team of people that have been, they're professional photographers, and they've been shooting photographs of, of Duke and the things that happened to Duke and the people for, decades. And so they've got this huge body of work that goes back to the first days of digital photography, and even before. I think they've scanned some of those pre-digital ones in. And they've got a body of content, I think it's somewhere around 8 million images. And we've already done a phase 1 migration where we put half of that stuff into MediaBeacon. And we've just started the second half, so that's happening as we speak. And it went really well, and we're excited about that. But that's our core stakeholder. And one reason we are really excited to work with them is that they, having been working on managing collections of these photographs and videos for all this time, they know how to do it really well. And so one of those aspects is metadata. So they've got really clear standards for what metadata you should use. And as this service spins up, one of the next steps for me will be to kind of build some community around the service and get them together and get the Duke photography people in the room and kind of going through, here's the metadata that you definitely need to add. Typically it's IPTC core metadata, the creator fields, keywords and subject, location, date, things like that are all essential. And that all comes into MediaBeacon under what MediaBeacon calls its double and core metadata framework. And so as that stuff gets added to MediaBeacon, either through the front end or we have the ability actually to ingest it through the back end, which we do with those larger projects like the photo archive. All that metadata is automatically imported into the system. And if it is there, then it's searchable here under subject, and you can start to click into these and narrow down by keyword. Or you could type it in the search field in the top if something's been added, then that becomes searchable that way. And I mentioned the color profiles. So here's an example from the Duke OIT. My group has a communications team, and they do a lot with branding. How does OIT brand itself? If I'm going to do a presentation like this, I don't know if I think I put a Duke OIT logo in there. Well, I would probably want to use the official one. And so they're going to make this content available to everybody who needs it. And before they were using Box, and I don't know if you can see here, they made kind of a valiant effort to kind of make these subfolders. All these, when you see the index here, these all correspond to folders on the NAS for MediaBeacon. And that's actually, I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. But so this is kind of, if you start, that's one thing we've learned about is if you start with a great folder organization, that's kind of key to a project like this, is kind of have some structure beforehand, and then that gets mapped and paralleled in MediaBeacon. But they made a great effort to make that easy to understand. But I think when you're looking at verbal terminology like that, it's so much harder to kind of understand that and interpret it than just looking at it. So that's what the value of this is. And here you can see if I wanted just an orange one, I clicked on that down here, and then it kind of narrows the search down to that. So that's a huge win for us. MediaBeacon has a review and approval workflow, which that was one thing we were looking for. I wouldn't say it was a deal breaker. I think one thing we got into in kind of looking at this is that there are a lot of kind of parallel systems and definitely a lot of overlap in terms of things that we do. Like that video production team that I mentioned that produces the academic course content, they actually use a separate asset management system that's focused more on video. And review and approval is actually a core project or core feature for that, because they actually are working collaboratively and need to use that a lot. MediaBeacon is a tool, and I'll talk about this also. It does support video, and it does a pretty good job, but it's probably not optimized for that. And if you're heavily involved in collaborating, actively on a project with other people, this probably isn't the solution for you. So you kind of have to kind of really understand the market space and how each vendor is targeting, their product. But this does have a neat review and approval workflow where I can. Here's a video in the system, actually. It's got a little timeline. It does some simple trimming. I could export clips out of here if I wanted. But I can kind of draw little squares on here and make an annotation, and I can tag someone, and then they would get an email. And when they logged into MediaBeacon, they'd also see this little notification area where it would show them that there's been activity there on this asset that was important to them. So that's something that's cool too. So I mentioned the idea that MediaBeacon isn't necessarily what we're wedded to forever. And the idea, again, is that folder structure that that is on the NAS. This content exists on Duke infrastructure. So, and that's the core part of it. All the metadata stuff is nice to have, but that's easily replicable. I mean, we'd have to do obviously an import again of those 8 million assets into a new system, and that would be not insignificant, but kind of thinking about this in advance has put us, I think, in a good position, to move to another system if we needed to. And yeah, this is actually the NAS folders, and then you can see the correspondence there to the folders in MediaBeacon. So the core requirements that we were working with was definitely that NAS, the ability to use our NAS shares, and specifically to be able to use separate NAS shares, because part of that administrative piece for the Duke network attached storage is that each group has their own share, or multiple shares in some cases. Like the Pratt School of Engineering has a share, and then we've kind of mapped that into MediaBeacon, and the Divinity School has a share, and that's also mapped separately into MediaBeacon, and then we can set up access control lists that correspond to the people in those functional units, and people only see the content that's relevant for them. I mentioned built around images, particularly digital photographs, but also does need to support video. Integrating with our enterprise single sign-on, we use Shibboleth and Grouper at Duke. Grouper is the system that houses all million or so groups, like those could be class groups or administrative groups. And we don't currently have the ability to map those into MediaBeacon. So we're doing all the group management on the application side. That could be something that I think if we did move to another product, we'd try to solve that problem. We do need support. One challenge that we ran into, realized early on, was that digital asset management systems could, and again, getting into that kind of Venn diagram issue, they can be targeted very differently. Some of them are really comprehensive in the types of documents that they support, and we didn't want to get super into that. I mean, you can actually put almost anything into MediaBeacon. It won't give you a thumbnail, for something that doesn't officially support. It'll just be kind of like a gray icon there. So you could do it if you wanted, but we did need support for, we felt, PDFs and MS Office documents, like Word documents and things. So the ability to generate a preview for those was important too, we thought. We needed to run on our enterprise, servers. MediaBeacon is running on a Windows server, and so we've got support from the Windows team to manage that. And I mentioned the ability to create working groups and sub-accounts with different levels of access. So you'd have kind of top-level administrators for a different functional unit, and you'd have people that might have creator-level access within that group. And then there's a third tier that's really important, obviously, is just viewer-level access, the ability to just see and browse and download the assets. We also needed, and this was a little bit of a sticking point with MediaBeacon until recently, is the ability to share with external non-licensed users, because the way MediaBeacon works, it actually uses a license for anyone who logs into the system, and we've got a limited number of licenses. I think we currently have like 400 licenses, and anytime somebody logs into the system, which is integrated with our single sign-on, it kind of takes one of those away. So we needed a way to kind of separate that use case where, okay, I'm a creator for the Pratt School, and I'm going to create a collection of 100 assets that I want to share with Pratt alumni. And we have now what's called a portal feature in MediaBeacon, which was actually a license add-on that we had to purchase that allows us to create a collection for those people and then just kind of send them the URL and then be able to share that content with them. And we mentioned the collaboration workflow. We thought that we just needed desktop support, but it turned out pretty quickly that we had some of our users saying that they wanted to be able to download these assets in the field. I think our facilities management group was interested in downloading schematics while they're in a building, like looking at what to do to upgrade that building. And so those are in PDF format, and they wanted to be able to see those. And so the preview, be able to download a preview and see PDF and see the preview was important. We don't have, there's no mobile app for MediaBeacon, so that's a little bit of a sticking point. Last semester, we actually worked with a computer science graduate class at Duke, and they built a really amazing app that does it. I mean, we were like, they blew us away. They had all the Dublin Core metadata was coming in there. It's really fantastic, but the students left, and we tried to get it to work, and I think they had tested it maybe on like some local storage, but we tried to get it working on our NAS storage, and it's not working right now. But so we've got our enterprise web team, app development team is working on taking a look at that code and figure out whether they're going to just use that code and tweak it, or build their own kind of similar system. But so that's something that we're working on, and we will have a mobile app. But we were kind of disappointed that wasn't really important for MediaBeacon. Mentioned the metadata support. That's really key. User-friendly thumbnails with infinite scroll. We actually found a lot of the tools that we're looking at didn't have the infinite scroll, so that would kind of limit you on what you were searching for, because you could only search for what was showing on the pages that you had visible at the time. So that would just be a small subset of the content. AI, that's an important piece too that we haven't really explored, as fully as we would like to. Is there's some integrated AI, I mentioned even just like the color recognition and things, but there's the ability with a system like this to kind of integrate, say, with an external AI engine like Microsoft, is something that we're looking at with the ability to kind of like take this data out of the system, run it through, something like that will do facial recognition and object recognition and really sophisticated stuff. Looking for a photo of Duke Chapel, and it scanned everything and found everything that's close to that, and then bring it back into the system with that metadata added to it. That's definitely kind of a next level thing that we're excited about moving forward with. So, I mentioned things like color object recognition. OCR would be another one, and we do that. We have used Panopto, and we love that that's integrated with Panopto. So things like that, maybe customizable dictionaries and vocabularies are important as well to kind of help these things learn faces and things like that. So these are the tools that we looked at. We looked at one called For All Portal, which is a really cool, kind of clean, modern looking tool. Love the UI. The challenges with that one, some of these were just kind of early on roadblocks, as we knew we just couldn't work with it because we needed to be able to set up a proof of concept on our own infrastructure and to see if it worked. And that just wasn't going to be feasible given the price that they gave us to do that. So we had to kind of eliminate them that way. But that might be a good solution. And who knows, if you can kind of get them to agree to let you do a POC, then maybe that's going to be a killer app for your school. Iconic was another one. Another good modern looking tool. We did have some problems with it, with the metadata and with importing content. We mentioned those two ways of getting content into the system. One is through the front end, where you're just kind of dragging and dropping, or clicking a button and then browsing on your local system and selecting content. But the other way is for larger bodies of material. You want to be able to bring that in on the back end. We had some problems with that, and that was also one of the ones that had the pagination limitation with what would be able to show and what you could search on. Axle AI was another one that looks pretty awesome. Another modern tool. There was no UI-based import for the NAS content. So I think a lot of these tools are probably want you to be in the cloud. They might have some level of on-prem support, but here's where we ran into some challenges with the level of on-prem support that they would be able to offer. And they also had limited support for the Office and PDFs. And Evolphin, this is a really cool tool. This actually probably is better suited toward a more video heavy project than image one. It's just got a great feature set for that, for collaborative video editing. And Canto Cumulus, this was kind of an old school product. This was used by the Duke photography people locally for a long, long time to manage their collection. And so it had the benefit of being familiar. But like a lot of these tools, they announced, actually, we had started to talk to them. It was kind of, an old looking UI and probably needed some work to modernize it, but they decided that they were going to stop supporting the on-prem installation. So that kind of ruled them out immediately for us. And then MediaBeacon. So MediaBeacon has been kind of moving along. We kind of describe it in some ways as Grandpa's jalopy. It's kind of, it was developed like in the 90s, and it kind of sometimes feels that way, especially on the back end. I would say probably more for us as administrators of the system. It's kind of hard to use. It's got a lot of functionality, it's powerful, but to be able to get a lot of that functionality, like the process of adding, setting up the ACLs, the different permission levels, is very cumbersome. And quite a challenge, just to kind of navigate the complexity of the interface. But it's definitely working well, and people like it. We're scaling up. And so far we'll keep working with it. And so what's going well, we've definitely had a lot of growth in the first year. About this time last year was when we went to live for the first time in production. And we've got, as I mentioned, the 4 million assets from the Duke Photography Archive so far, with another 4 million to follow. And, tens of thousands from about a variety of other groups. So we've got 300 total users in the system. Some of those I think we're going to be able to eliminate because they might have been brought on for that kind of external sharing, use case for people. I think our School of Medicine is doing a lot with that, where they really just kind of bringing people in with accounts in order just to be able to view content. So we'll be able to be more efficient with that. And then 16 schools and departments are using it in the first year. So word's getting around, and we're happy about that. It does require minimal training on the user end, so that's great. There's going to be some learning curves with things like metadata and things like that as we kind of get rolling, and we'll try to, as I mentioned, educate users about that. And definitely the fact that we will be able to promote these standards, across the campus is super exciting. We count that as a success, not just to get these assets onto Duke supported technology where, it can be preserved, but also to make it more accessible. As people use these standards, then that stuff becomes much more accessible across the enterprise. And we're also kind of encouraging the folder structure and things like file naming conventions as part of that as well, because as I mentioned, getting people to do that up front is really critical, I think, to their success in MediaBeacon. So a lot of times we'll consult with a group early on, and then it might take a month or two before we hear back from them if they're ready to actually bring the content in, because they've been spending time cleaning things up, which is great, and they should have been doing that anyway. And then sharing within departments is another big win. So some of the challenges, I mentioned the count provisioning process is pretty cumbersome and time consuming. Sharing with external users, that's just only recently we got that working. That was actually kind of complex because the external portals use AWS buckets, and they could be Duke manages its own AWS buckets, so we were able to do that. But to get those to work with the NAS storage was a real challenge, and it was clear that MediaBeacon hadn't actually solved that use case before, because it just didn't work for a while. And then we had some tickets open and worked with them for a while, and they finally issued an update where they fixed whatever the problem was, and now it's working. So we're actually kind of thinking we would have to move away from MediaBeacon if they didn't get that working, but that's as of, I think, about 2 weeks ago. That's now a checkbox. And then I mentioned the mobile support, so that's something that we're super excited about, and I think we will be able to get that working. That app was really awesome that the students did. It's one of the things that makes me excited to work at a university, is just being able to see all the smart, people that are there, students and faculty and IT staff. They're really amazing, so I love that. Fine-tuning the ingest process. We had some challenges with that big 4 million, first phase Duke Photography import. One is kind of understanding, okay, how much of this is done now? Are we successful or not? And so I mentioned that cumbersome interface. We had to spend a lot of time kind of pouring through the logs while this import was in process, kind of figuring out where the errors were and, what did that represent? Was that something we need to be concerned about? Or is this, it seems like it's going slow. How do I know if it's actually going too slow? Things like that. And we worked with MediaBeacon to solve a little bit of that. They developed some what are called workflows, which are essentially scripts that are used within the application that can kind of help report on if there are files that are in the system that don't have previews associated with them. And that's really the key, is does this file have a valid preview created for it? And so now we can see that a little bit better. So I think this phase 2 will be a little bit easier. And I mentioned the administrative tools. So some things that we're working on and excited about down the road. Gonna leverage the APIs to integrate with a lot of the systems that we already have on campus. We've actually got another digital asset management tool that's used by the central Duke communications team called WebDAM. I don't know if some of you have heard of it. But one challenge with WebDAM is it's completely cloud-based. The storage is insanely expensive. And so we realized early on, and that's one reason that why we kind of got to this project, was we realized that people were trying to upload tons and tons of assets from those hard drives into WebDAM, and realized, well, we can't do that. This is a cloud service, it's too expensive. So we need something different. But we would like the ability, because WebDAM is really, the purpose of that is more of a highly curated, like here's, there's this photo shoot done in March of President Price, and here are the 3 photos that the central communications team has selected as being, the best ones that people should be using to share in their publications. Well, those could go on WebDAM, and then that's something that all the communicators are tapped into and have access to, where they can kind of search and browse within that system. So we'd like to be able to kind of push content out from MediaBeacon, into WebDAM would be a great use case. I mentioned that we just went live with Canvas. We'd love to potentially have an integration there. I mentioned WarpWire and Panopto, being able to publish from MediaBeacon to that. WarpWire actually does support images. I actually thought for a while, unfortunately, WarpWire has kind of gone the way of a lot of these tools like Panopto, where they start out as a highly dynamic startup, and you have a lot of input in the company, but maybe less so as they get successful, and then they get bought, and then it's not quite the same situation as we did this with Panopto too. I mean, we were on the calls weekly with the leadership back then and telling them what they needed to do, and they listened and they did it. And now, like, all our features we only have a few now that we need them to do, but that's kind of a rare opportunity. But yeah, we thought WarpWire for a while might potentially be amenable to making something like this, because they already had some of the framework, but being able to push images to it would be helpful. We have something called the Duke University Archive, which is actually kind of a libraries type project. And this is by, basically what assets this organization has deemed historically significant for Duke. And so I think the Duke Photography Archive is kind of a little bit on the cusp. I don't think they quite fit most of the criteria for that. So I don't know that the archive people want that collection in the archive right now, at least. So that was another thing that led to MediaBeacon, is this is the place where that goes now and fits. But there could be some assets within MediaBeacon that are, in that category of historically significant, and being able to push those out to that would be great. I mentioned briefly that we have a signage system. We use OptiSigns right now as our enterprise signage system, with an add-on that was homegrown called Duke Flyer, which is a way that people can upload flyers for consideration to be added to other people's signs. So you can kind of have this pool that you upload them to. And then the owners of those signs could kind of go in and look at the pool and select one and say, oh yeah, that'd be great. Let me accept that one for my sign. So being able to push content from MediaBeacon into that would be great. We've got some like this interactive wall application at the Duke Alumni Center. Being able to put materials there would be great. And then the standard social media stuff would be fantastic. And then video production and management systems as well. And then I mentioned the AI piece, being able to take content out of that and put it into some huge AI engine that would be, of course, licensed separately, and then bring that back into MediaBeacon with that added metadata attached. So that's all of my content, and I definitely would love to hear from you. I've got a few questions from you all. I don't know if you'd mind answering some of these, but I'd love to know, is centralized asset management on any of your all's radar? Or something you're thinking about, or at least have talked about? Yeah.
Well, I know at UNLV, one of the things that's happened is Google Drive storage is starting to shrink.
Yeah.
And there's all sorts of departments that have B-roll from their school, or they have files that they want to preserve. And we must have gotten 3 or 4 calls in the last 2 weeks from random departments that said, "Oh, we hear you have Panopto. We store all of that B-roll."
Yeah.
Well, the intention of Panopto is for people to view said B-roll, so if somebody doesn't watch it, it's going to go to archive and then delete. So we were looking into some kind of media asset management, not necessarily completely quote-unquote centralized, but something where these folks have an alternative to use to be able to keep things. But I think just based off the presentation, there's a lot more we could unlock, even beyond just keeping a spot for some B-roll. Maybe somebody else might find that B-roll useful for something and could request access to it or something like that. So
yeah,
but it is somewhat on the radar to at least have a solution there for content that may not necessarily need to be viewed, once a day.
Yep.
It's probably there just when it's needed.
Yeah. Yeah. Please look me up if you do that. I'd be curious to hear what solution you choose. You may end up with one that's a little more video, heavy, based on what you're saying now. That'd be interesting to hear, what you do with that.
You bet.
Yeah. Thank you. And storage. How is your school handling storage? Do you have enterprise storage? Is it managed departmentally versus centrally, on-prem, cloud? Any thoughts on that? And then the other big question I have is for all of you who are, I'm not sure how many of you are central, with a group like mine that's a central IT service or AV. But what services do you support that weren't on this list, and what's next on your radar? I'd love to hear about that as well. And heard you use Panopto already.
Absolutely, yeah.
Any other Panopto users here? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, Panopto is interesting. It could have maybe in the old days been used for that purpose, but we were under the impression for a long time that there was unlimited storage in Panopto.
We found out very quickly that was changing, and so that was where we also had to kind of step back and evaluate what we were doing.
Yeah.
So that's when content retention came in.
Exactly.
Moving things to an archive status.
Yeah.
Getting a phone call about why is it taking 48 hours to come back? If we wanted to recover it, but I think it's just one of those things where we've also realized that people want to keep everything forever.
Yes.
They don't want to see it moved around. They want to have a spot where they know they can recover it, they know they can have it, and they can go back and blow the dust off of it and have it available. So.
I hear you. We actually don't delete anything. We use just the cold storage and we keep it forever. We kind of came up with that because we've had too many people push back on the deletion. Even content we had data to show this content has never been viewed in 5 years. And still they're like, no, I don't want to delete it. So if you say, okay, it's just going to go to cold storage, Panopto calls Glacier, it's actually a really great solution for it. It just takes a little bit longer to recover it. They call it thawing it. They say up to 48 hours. Most of the time it's less than that. Sometimes it does take the 48 hours though. But so yeah, that's one solution. Yeah.
Just have a question for you, because we do have units on campus that have lots of media, and they want to make it available, but for a specific group of people. And it sounded a lot like this was a repository for anybody to view anything that was in the system, rather than this specific unit or this particular pool of people. And I was thinking, even when you shared the schematics, I can't imagine that you would want everybody to be able to see building schematics. That could be a little bit.
Absolutely. I'm sorry. I must not have done a good job of explaining that. Yeah, we definitely, this is kind of cordoned off into working groups.
Okay.
So like when you are kind of onboarded into MediaBeacon, we set up I call an ACL for your team. And then you can tell us that, you and someone else are the administrators. So you are the ones that have full access, and then you can kind of there's another level of access below that. And then the third level is that viewer level access. And so you would basically kind of work within these assets within your team first and manage it, and then decide what you want to be available more broadly.
Okay.
Yeah, great
That
question.
makes more sense than when you were talking about the whole license.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm sorry. Get clear.
Kind of on off topic, I was just curious. So you mentioned using as far as training the AI and everything, using kind of facial recognition, stuff like that. Is that on a university? I'm just curious, with the 4 million images, 8 million. Does that require any kind of university policy or anything as far as if there is students, faculty, etc., for using that with the face training?
That's a great question. Yeah, that's definitely going to be one of the things.
I know you're doing AI policy now at university, but
yes, yeah, we would be working through those questions when we spin that project up for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, that's definitely one aspect of it, is getting the clearance and just understanding what that means when you're kind of doing that level of recognition. So. Any other questions? I really appreciate y'all coming. Feel free to grab me afterwards if there's something you want to talk about or any point during the conference later. Thanks.